Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So today we're going to talk about information technology, contributions and caveats, and information technology, or IT as it applies to policing. So technology and policing is going to be the discussion of the day. So these are some of the things we want to kind of lay out and discuss along the way. And as as we discuss, keep this slide kind of in the back of your mind as kind of the template, if you will, of how we would assess the use of technology in policing overall. So we're going to discuss the roles of technology in policing, past, present, and future. We're going to take a look at some of the foundations of the technology and where it comes from. And so we talk really about the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Justice, or NIJ, which is part of the Department of Justice. And we talked a little bit about this in, I think it was chapter 1, where NIJ is the science part of the Department of Justice. So they keep an eye on the science aspects as it applies to policing and criminal justice programs in the country. And so there's a big push to review technologies and different applications of that technology within policing, corrections, courts, probation, parole. And so these two major players, the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Justice, are big players, and they kind of help guide policy, if you will, across the criminal justice system. And we're going to talk about that with regard to like legacy systems, like, things that we have already that we've enhanced and used, emerging technologies, what can help us in the future, what are we looking at, what is trying to be developed, and how can that apply to the criminal justice system in the future. And then mostly advances in forensic science, which is a huge part of both the National Science Foundation and NIJ's role, if you will. And that is the collection, evaluation, of evidence and analysis of evidence and how it applies to the criminal justice system. And then we're going to talk a little bit about data, because everything we do is about data, especially with technology. So we have data collection, data analysis, data mining, and I should also include in that is data storage. It's not only mining, but that the after part of storage is then mining that data, going back and taking a look, what do we have? And then communications, communications by, excuse me. Sorry about that. Communications by way of technology, being able to talk to one another, both via radio and via phone and via data links. So we have this idea of communication with redundancy built in, like a backup plan, and then reliance. Is it reliable? Interoperability, we can put multiple agencies on certain networks and then protect that data, protect that communication with encryption. So these are all the kinds of things that we're going to kind of weave through the application of technology in policing. So how new IT should be used. So policing technology should focus on their effectiveness in reducing crime and improving service to citizens. And likewise, if we were talking about policing, or we're talking about courts or corrections, we should have that same application, but based on that prevailing framework, we need to, is it improving the current situation? And that's kind of the question we need to ask. Uh, because police often frame policing in terms of reactive response to calls for service, they're more likely to use technology for that purpose. And so, what do we know? What can help us get information to the officers quicker in their policing modes about the call for service? Police are less likely to use technology for more proactive um, and strategic tasks. So, you know, those kinds of things, we have to learn to use those technologies in that way and adapt the technologies to help us in more proactive policing and in a more strategic way. And that's basically learned behavior. So we have a use of technology. It's great, but what can we do with it and how do we apply it to a more proactive and strategic task? So that's always the question. Now, how do we get more, juice from that squeeze, so to speak? Some of the use of technology and legal guidance. So there's a wide range of unresolved legal issues with technology. And many IT tools are so new that the courts have not yet had time to make rulings on them. Um, in different state, federal courts have handed down conflicting rulings. And, ultimately, the Supreme Court is the law of the land, what they decide. But before that, it's the Federal Court of Appeals. And then next would be the state Supreme Court and the state Court of Appeals. And there's a lot of technology uses that are still kind of hung up in limbo with state courts and state Supreme Courts. And, they haven't risen to the level of, constitutional deficiencies in their application or abridging constitutional deficiencies in their application. So we'll see that, I think, as more and more cases, filter through the lower courts and wind up on appeals courts, and then ultimately pieces will then wind up in the lap of the Supreme Court. But again, case law really kind of dictates, some of the uses and contributions of technology as it applies today. So really, the biggest concerns are privacy and the Constitution. And when you think about that, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is all about individual liberties and, protecting individuals from government abuse. And the use of technology has a way to kind of skirt those issues by way of privacy and abuse of that use of technology in a way that would affect people's individual liberties and privacy. So privacy is a big concern with a lot of this, and we'll see here in a couple of minutes how it applies to things like body-worn cameras, etc. So information technology and support of the police. So the police mission is what we're talking about. So information technology can support major functions within policing organizations. So technology today supports functions in administration, communication, records management, crime analysis, and surveillance systems. So most of those applications, whether it's human resource software packages for administration, scheduling, and patrol assignments in manpower and resource applications, communications, radio communications, data communications, RMS systems, records management systems, mobile data. All of that information must be stored, analyzed, and utilized in a way that supports these functions. So we have reactive functions, responding to calls for service, emergencies, and conducting investigations. And then we have proactive functions, where it's a hotspots patrol, community-oriented policing and citizen engagement through crime analysis, as we discussed in Chapter 4, all those smart policing initiatives, you know, kind of getting in front of crime and, using that technology to make easier flow of communication between the general public and the police by way of crime data, and informing the public of information led issues in policing. And so that's probably one of the biggest benefits of information technology, is the collection of the data, the analysis of the data, and the dissemination of the data in a way that is, helpful and proactive, not only to the police, but also to the public. So the rationale for IT. So roughly 90% of all police officers' time is spent acquiring, collecting, and distributing information. When you think about it, they make observations. Police officers are social scientists. They make observations and then they record those observations. And those observations are recorded in the form of police reports, summonses, offense reports, arrests, right? So when we, make those observations and we see a criminal act, and then we take action and we make an arrest, we write a report, we collect that data, location, time, place, offense, the person, who they are, what they were doing, etc. That stuff's all recorded, and that becomes data. And that data is useful to help us build, this crime statistics and information about what's happening where and why. And so when we think about what it is we're trying to accomplish, it is the use of IT hastens that collection, analysis, and distribution of information to not only to policing agencies themselves, they also are consumers of their own data, but also to inform the public about issues of crime and disorder in their communities. So modern sophisticated policing approaches, such as crime stat, are information intensive and data dependent or data driven environments. So when we have these, weekly meetings in some of the big cities like New York City, they're a big ComStat organization, which means that they have the ComStat stands for Computer Statistics Driven Data Information. And what ComStat does is it brings community members, community leaders, and police together on a weekly, monthly basis to discuss what's happening in their neighborhoods. And we look at the numbers, we look at the statistics, we look at the reports, and all of that is then drives, the response or predictive policing response for the next week, the next month, the next quarter. And, so all of that information, is used in a routine fashion in most police departments today. And that requires information on crime, suspects, community conditions, and priorities. So those are, kind of the hallmark of that kind of ComStat approach to policing and community engagement. So traditional sources of information. So operations and information systems. So you have police radios, you have records, the records management systems, you have the NCIC, these big databases that we talked about, which was actually created by J. Edgar Hoover in 1967, Department of Justice. that's the backbone today of most police data and information. Mobile computers in cars, cell phones. You have different types of cell phone connectivity and networks that are utilized by police. So Verizon, which is one of the nation's largest cell phone providers, has a program called FirstNet. It's a 5G public safety network that they've carved out across the country. And we found that this was a problem shortly after 9/11, 2001, was that there was so much going on across the country that a lot of the phone services couldn't handle the traffic. So our networks, our traditional phone networks, could not handle the traffic, and they crashed. Many of these systems crashed, and so luckily, we had police radios, and we had some other talk around devices that were not affected by the phone crash, if you will. The landline and cellular networks, just they were overloaded with calls, and many of these systems crashed, and it took weeks to get them back online. So, as a result, Verizon and some of the federal partners, along with state and local partners, came up with the idea of creating a public safety 5G network specifically designed for public safety use only, not sharing the lines, not sharing that bandwidth or the frequencies with, the general public or businesses. But, in case of an emergency, there's enough bandwidth there to help facilitate proper communications across the United States between state, federal, and local public safety members. So the system can be used in times of emergencies. And then you have mobile data, RMS, and GIS. All of these things are kind of everyday commonplace in today's policing apparatus and in most public safety apparatus, whether it's police, fire, EMS. They have all of those tools that are being used and have been used for probably about the last 20 years. Field reporting, real-time crime data reports. So one of the the beauties of field reporting and some of the records management systems that are integrated with field reporting is that the officers out in the field, they have a computer. They can take a report by opening up a program, filling in the program with the data required using drop-down boxes and beat areas and assignments, and that then gets sent to a local server. That server then sends that to supervisors, records supervisors, and police supervisors, who then check it for accuracy, not accuracy in terms of the information that the officer writes, but accuracy in terms of the date, time, location, the right patrol area, the right code sections, all of those things that apply, to make sure that all those pieces don't need to be amended. And then it goes to review by the supervisor, and then if it clears, then it goes right into the RMS system, the records management system. Before, you would have to handwrite that report, you'd copy it, you'd turn copies in. At the end of the day, officers would read them, they'd put them in, and supervisors would read them, approve them, they put those reports into the records system. Then there was somebody who would transcribe all of that information into an in-house record system and keep the written reports as well. And all of that took time. It took literally, time, weeks to, especially in a busy environment, it took literally weeks to get all of that information loaded up in the system and available for use. Well, with this field reporting process and this data technology, um, the the data is what we would call real time. So within 12 hours, you would see basically this data being displayed in crime statistics, in that's what we call real time. So there's not a huge lag time between the offense, the reporting, and then that time, that data being used in a strategic way to plan the next day's events. So it's not, we're talking about, very short turnaround times. And that is very helpful in applying, proactive measures based on certain crime trends that we see occurring, from the day before or the night before. And so it's very helpful to have that kind of, real-time crime data reporting through this apparatus called field reporting. And most progressive agencies across the country are using some sort of field reporting, probably, more than 50%, if not more than 70% are using some form of field reporting. Then you have, other devices that aid in collection of data, while the officers are doing routine patrols, such as automated license plate readers or LPR. So as the officers are going through their beat areas, that those cameras are collecting license plate information from, streets and parking lots and neighborhoods, that actually put those that data marks the car, the tag with a time stamp and geolocation stamp, so you can go back and review that data if you determine that there's vehicles of interest in that neighborhood, that may be associated with other crime aspects. You can actually go back there and look at that data. The big question there is, how do we store that data, and what do we do with that data? With regard to, keeping it for a period of time, and the lifespan of that data and the use of that data after it's initially collected. So a lot of privacy advocates are, really against license plate readers. They say it's an invasion of privacy, that government's keeping track of people's movements. But again, these are public roads, public parking lots. There's really, the Supreme Court's ruled over and over and over again that there's no expectation of privacy if you're driving a car on a public highway. That's open public information. Command and control systems like 911, computer-aided dispatching, and GPS, global positioning systems to help locate vehicles and assets in the field, to help better track and maintain resources that are out in the field. Management information systems, databases such as officers' productivity, citizen complaints, equipment inventory, evidence inventory, calls for service data. All of that stuff is, now computerized, and so we can look at those types of things that occur on the officers, on a daily basis, that, kind of paints a bigger picture, if you will, or a more detailed picture of their effectiveness, efficiency, and productivity as an officer. And then there's monitoring and surveillance systems that are put into place, such as body-worn cameras. Those are monitoring systems, right? They're monitoring the communication and the interaction between citizens and police officers. But there's also other monitoring systems like, complaint monitoring systems where, supervisors in internal affairs gets, notices of officers who, write too many use of force complaints in any given time period. So if they have been made an arrest, and that arrest they had to use force. Then they write an a use of force complaint, and the same thing with types of arrests. DUIs, drunken publics, disorderly conducts. What kind of flags are coming up with this officer's productivity and behavior as a result of making sure and tracking their activities um, on a daily basis. So those are all types of surveillance systems and information that is technology that uses both internally and externally in police organizations. Community policing and problem-oriented policing and sources of information, right? Geographic information systems, crime mapping and maps identifying and analyzing locations-based problems or place-based problems, part of problem-oriented policing. Global positioning systems, again, we talked a little bit about that, about resource allocation and distribution. Problem-solving information systems, databases, and that are complemented by an ongoing problem-solving effort. So you would put in like premise history information, or you could read premise history information. Like if you get sent to a call or specific location, you can read the history of how we were there. That history is developed through other calls for service to that same location, date, time, officer, disposition, a brief description of why they were there, anything that came out of that, an arrest, a warrant service, a subpoena service, a report. All of that information can be looked up in what they call premise history, and it's there as almost as an instant based on that process we talked about through field reporting, records management, and that real-time crime data for the next day. External information systems, data from other organizations and from public sources. Public sources such as criminal history, court information, tax information, public utilities information. You can overlay all of these templates and this data on top of one another to help create a more comprehensive picture of what we're looking at in terms of problems and problem-solving issues, problem-solving sources of information to give us those, a deeper understanding of a particular problem or particular problem area based on all of those types of data systems that have those particular addresses associated with it from some of those databases that I just mentioned. So let's talk about body-worn cameras for just a minute. So, we've talked about some of the institutional or legacy systems of, communications, records management systems, computer-aided dispatch, field reporting, and how all that data gets there. Well, body-worn cameras are also produce data, but it's a different type of data. And the arguments for body-worn cameras, is that examination of police practices and methods. So the police and the public and other government officials, courts, prosecutors, city managers, police citizens review boards can see this information so they can examine police practices and methods without having to have been there on the scene. The emphasis on greater transparency of police activity. So those are really the arguments that, for pushing or moving towards this body-worn camera environment. So implementing body-worn camera programs carry a number of costs, issues, and problems associated with them. And so one of the things you have to guard for when we think about, jumping into these programs is overinvestment in a device and program thinking it's going to solve all of your problems. That's what I mean by overinvestment. You're putting all the eggs in this body-worn camera basket. This happened during the Obama administration. when there was a police officer in Massachusetts, stopped a person outside their house. He happened to be minority, African American, and who was basically at his own house, and he was a Harvard professor, and the officer kind of didn't believe him in this neighborhood, and so this had you probably recall this. Maybe you've read about it in some later publications. So one of the big things is that the Obama administration, pushed this body-worn camera device so that the the police and the public could get a really an insight into what was happening on the streets, especially in minority neighborhoods. So they invested a lot of federal money through the Department of Justice with grants helping agencies obtain body worn cameras. And that was supposed to fix everything in police and community relations. And so here we are, some 12 plus years later, and we're probably in a worse place than we were at the start of this, based on that incident over that police officer and that Harvard professor, with George Floyd and Trayvon Martin. Although Trayvon Martin is not really a police issue, that was I should not use that as an example, because Trayvon Martin had no run-in with the police. It was with a citizen at that particular time who was a neighborhood watch person. The police did arrest that person later on, but it still kind of bled back on the police in terms of community relations, that initially this person was not arrested and charged with the murder of Trayvon Martin. It took some cajoling by the prosecutor's office to get that Florida department to move forward in arresting and prosecuting Trayvon Martin's killer. But it was one of those things that everybody it still kind of blew back on the police. But here you have, George Floyd. You have other incidents across the country, in New York, in South Carolina, and in Missouri, that all kind of led to this perfect storm of Michael Brown in Missouri, and Walter Scott in North Carolina, and then Eric Gardner in New York City, and then George Floyd, most recently in Minneapolis. So all of these kinds of perfect storms contributed to this environment, and police body-worn cameras had been implemented prior to most of those encounters, and yet we're still at that same place, and haven't really moved in a positive way off of to improving community and police relationships as a result of this use of body worn camera technology. So again, it was supposed to be a paradigm shift in policing and community relations, and it has not fulfilled that expectation. Studies of implementation and use of body-worn cameras. So there's been a lot of studies and a lot of different conflicting information, and we haven't really, worked it all out, because it's a fairly new. It's been around for, maybe about 15 years now on a large scale. It's been around longer than that, but on a large scale for less than 15 years. And so there's a lot of conflicting information. Does it change the officer? Does it change the citizens? Initially it might, but what data do we have, and how do we get to that data? By analyzing just snapshots, if you will, of body-worn camera video. And they don't always show what we expect them to show. They're devices. They have limitations. They have limited fields of view, and they also don't have a culmination of the senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, feel, all of those things that normal people rely on every day to make good decisions about what they're doing and how they're doing it. And so body-worn cameras can only take, a snapshot, if you will, of the environment, of the policing environment, only from the perspective of this 120 degrees camera focus or field of focus. So they are limited is where I'm going with that, and they don't always show what everybody thinks they will show. Body-worn cameras considerations. So there's legal issues pertaining to privacy. So when do you turn them on? When do you turn them off? Dealing with victims, domestic victims, sexual assault victims, elderly victims, young victims, juvenile offenders. How often, do we release that information? Even if it's a heinous crime that gets released, you run the risk of putting that video out there in the community, potentially prejudicing the potential jury members against the offenders simply because they saw the video, and they've made up their own minds already. So there's all kinds of considerations about, legal considerations and legal issues pertaining to the use of body-worn cameras and privacy. Storage and related equipment costs. So, I mean, I know you guys, most of you are fairly tech savvy, but the higher the definition of the recording, the greater the volume of data and storage it requires. And so when you're recording videos 10, 12 hours a day of police officers doing their job in high definition, not only video, but with audio to go with it. So now you have the file sizes are huge. And so you have to have storage to be able to accommodate all of these, body-worn camera footage and the devices. And when do we erase them? When do nothing happened today until something happened today and somebody's looking for it and the police erase it, or then it brings the police into scrutiny, covering up for, other officers, etc. But at the same time, you can't store everything forever. And so you have to come up with policies and practices and safeguards in there. Who says that this is, not of evidentiary value at this particular time, and these data files can be deleted to make room on the server for, more data files. Who owns the data? Is that we'll talk here about that in just a second, but personnel considerations, department policy, what do the policies say about how the officer is supposed to operate that? And are there exceptions? And what happens if the officer doesn't turn that body camera on when he or she is supposed to by way of policy, or forgets? What do union organizations, like the Fraternal Order of Police and those agencies under CBAs, that's what that stands for, collective bargaining agreements, or CBAs, with unions, say about working conditions and body-worn cameras, and who's supposed to have access to that. So all of those are considerations. So it's not an easy undertaking when you make that big leap of faith to integrate body-worn camera devices. Policy and procedures concerning ownership and release of videos. Well, who owns that? Does the city own it? Does the police department own it? You see here, does the prosecutor's office own it? And if there is evidence of a crime, either evidence of a crime from the general public or the perpetrator, or evidence of a crime of a police officer who's committing a crime, i.e. An assault or in George Floyd's case, Derek Chauvin, he committed an assault by kneeling on George Floyd's back that ultimately, according to the medical examiner's office, led to his death or contributed to his death. So that's evidence of a crime against that police officer. So who owns who owns that video? Well, the prosecutors own that video because it's evidence of a crime. And so, how do they get from the police department through this process to not showing that video so you cannot try the case by in the media? And so there's all these considerations as well. In some places like DC, the mayor says, she has the right to review and release video, within 48 hours of an incident. And that has to be reviewed by not only the general counsel, but the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia before that body camera can really be released and be on safe legal ground, so you don't, disclose evidence to the public that they don't need to know about during the ongoing or the course of an investigation until the investigation is complete. It's one thing to release the body-worn camera video in trial, to the public. It's another to release it ahead of time and potentially cause problems for defendants by way of jury tampering, etc. Recurring costs of training and equipment. This is not inexpensive undertaking. So you see a lot of issues associated with the, purchasing, acquisition of body-worn camera and equipment over time. And so there are some considerations associated with that. So these costs of obtaining, the equipment also come with recurring costs that, including legal updated software, legal updates, rewriting policies, repair, replacement of malfunctioning or broken devices, battery usage, all of these things that drive the cost up. And when we think, oh, we'll just get one device per officer with an extra battery, well, from personal experience, I can tell you that these devices don't last long. They get damaged, they get broken during foot pursuits and fights and automobile accidents and all those other things, and you wind up having about a third of replacement costs associated with obtaining these devices for your agency. So you really have to buy at least 1/3 more devices, and it's hard to get people to understand that until you buy the devices and half of them are broken or not working or malfunctioning, or the batteries are expired and don't hold a charge. And then, why didn't your device? Well, I turned it on, the battery dies after 3 hours of use, and I work a 10-hour shift. That leaves 7 hours uncovered, and there aren't any more batteries because we didn't buy enough. So those are just some anecdotal examples of some of the problems and functionalities with devices, just like anything else. Cell phones are great until the battery dies, and you're reliant on that data and that information that you're blind without it. Again, talking about storage and data requirements, both from a legal perspective and a technical perspective, and these servers can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, for large departments, and multi-millions of dollars for large departments with purchasing the devices and the related equipment associated with body-worn cameras. So, just something to think about. It's not all perfect, just because you have a body-worn camera. Let's switch gears and talk about license plate readers. Specifically designed cameras to collect images of license plates. So, they're tilted. They're usually on the trunk of a car or the fenders of cars or the ends of light bars in patrol cars. And they take pictures of license plate images at a very rapid rate and convert that image to data. And they store that data with date, time, and geolocation stamps. And those compare that LPR data with other databases and information in those other databases that you can upload and run it against that database from the LPR, such as stolen tags or stolen vehicles, unpaid fines, persons who own that car is registered to, who may have outstanding warrants for their arrest. So you find it in a parking lot, and it comes back registered to somebody who, and that automatically runs it against the operator's license or wanted files through VSIN or NCIC. And so you can get real-time hits on vehicles in parking lots or on roadways that have somebody behind the wheel that may or may not be the person who is the registered owner, who is a wanted person or missing person or person of interest in a crime, right? So then that takes police work to either surveil it, stop the person, ask the right questions, wait for the person to commit a traffic infraction. It's one thing if you know the person and that's who that person is, or if you have a picture of their driver's license that comes up, and you can then make that visual confirmation that that's the person who's driving the car. That's one thing, but it also, is information that would not have been obtained, but not for the use of that technology, and the use of that technology on public highways, in public places, in public spaces, to help close cases, to help solve crime, to help, investigators create a greater database of information by which they can use to help them solve crimes. Provides, instant feedback, and it's unbiased and without objectivity, so it doesn't have, it just simply runs the tag numbers and the information, records them, and then tells you if that person is or is not wanted. Now, you might be able to say that if you're using, these LPRs in predominantly minority areas, that could be bias. And it just depends on the, how that usage and that application came to be. Do you do it everywhere in equal amounts, or are you particularly biased in your application of that particular technology in high minority areas? But if you're an officer working in an area that has a higher number of minorities, that's who you're going to come in contact with, is that those higher number of minorities. And so the location and your work environment kind of dictates your level of interaction with people. So there are some issues with how you apply some of these technologies, but they're also, like I said, they're unbiased and objective in most forms. They can process up to 10,000 license plates per hour, and they're highly accurate. They work through the heat of the day, at night, and everything is recorded, and then it's confirmed. It gives you a hit information, and then you have to visually confirm it. You have to go back and look at the tag and compare it with the registration and all that kind of stuff. It's not just a bingo. That's the, just because you got a hit on the LPR, that doesn't mean you don't have to confirm that information before you act upon it, and you do. Computerized crime mapping combines GPS information with crime statistics and aids the department's computer-aided dispatching system and demographic data from Census Bureau, and overlays all that information to provide you with really good um, data about what's happening in certain locations. Again, based on that type of the data in and the use of that data in, if you're putting good data in, you're getting a good product out. So provides a new perspective on crime that can be used to inform officers on where to concentrate their patrols or their resources. Um, Crime maps can be overlaid with layers, as we talked about before, of causative data. You can take crime maps where incidences are happening, and you can overlay that with addresses of people on probation or parole, or recently released from prison, or if you're having issues with sexual assaults or exposures, you would overlay that information with individuals who may be on the sex offender registry to kind of give you a composite of what you may be dealing with and who may be involved in this. There are different database systems where you can overlay the data to give you a more informed approach to investigating and solving offenses. So that's the information-led smart policing initiatives that we talked about in Chapter 4, community policing. Evidence-based or evidence-informed policies and practices. So just what we look at is, evidence of offenses, the number of offenses, who's committing the offenses, what time, what day, what are they doing specifically by MO. And that helps us, that information helps inform us on what the best practices may be in terms of identifying perpetrators and solving crime and assisting the community in restoring order, reducing crime, and increasing the quality of life. So all of this information really helps provide, good policing apparatus. And speaking of good policing apparatus, real-time crime centers. So these real-time crime centers use technology to reduce the reliance on paper reports and other non-integrated data to identify patterns. So this is happening right now. So if in some of these big cities, and even in Washington, D.C. and New York City, these information hubs resemble what we call like a mission control center that contains, years of voice, video, crime data translated into actionable intelligence. So all of this, we look at data, look at, LPRs, look at facial recognition on subway entrances and entrances to sporting venues, and all this information into a command center that's happening right in front of you real time. These are also known as Joint Operations Commands, or JOCs, where you have people who are watching from afar this complete set of data matrix from everything from CAD, GIS, LPR, arrest records, mugshots, facial recognition, warrant information. It's all happening simultaneously. And you are then able to help officers who are out in the field, on scene, going to calls, provide them with more updated information, looking at the calls for service history, premise history, utility data, public data, all of that kind of integrated into one, where and what they might be looking at in terms of, who's responsible, where they're going, even tracking vehicles by way of traffic cameras, LPR data, all of that information to help officers respond in a more appropriate and a successful manner to criminal offenses occurring in the field. And usually you see this in, like I said, large cities with a lot going on, such as New York City's Times Square, Super Bowl events in Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Strip, Mardi Gras in New Orleans. All of these things, really help provide and guide officers to keep a handle on what's going on out there and reduce the potential threat to the public. Anytime you have a major event in DC, where there's a protest or a march or just something happening downtown, that requires an issue or an incident, national security interest, such as a State of the Union address. All of these things are put into play in and around the nation's capital, looking at all different aspects and facets, including air traffic and travel information and all of those things, to help provide a real complex picture of what's happening real time in certain cities across the country. But it's all data driven. It's all information led, and it's all technology applications that acquire that data and analyze that data to some degree, along with human crime analysts, and then distribute that data to the right places. So really, all that data does no good if it's not being analyzed and it's not being strategically distributed to the right people at the right time. Data is of no value initially from a strategic or tactical perspective. Policing and social media and technology. A large part of policing community engagement occurs within the realm of social media. Social media is everywhere. By no means is this little list that I have here an exhaustive list. It is an exclusive list that, these are like the top, 5 or 6, but it's not an exhaustive list of social media apps. Police agencies now have social media relations officers and analysts to maintain a constant pulse or connection with social media vehicles 24/7, 365. Just like we have communications people on duty, dispatchers and call takers and all of that, computer operators, to run all this information. We also now have social media officers and social media analysts because, in places like New York City and Washington, D.C. and Miami and New Orleans and Las Vegas, things happen at such a rapid pace that, any of these things can pop up, which can, be a public safety issue if not maintained and monitored 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And this equates to real-time monitoring of open source media sites, as well as their official police sites. People send tips in by way of the police Facebook page or the police Twitter page, and those have to be monitored all the time, because if not, then you don't necessarily get the benefit of the timeliness, if you will, of the tip. Yeah, you can go back and take the tip and track it back down and information, but the timeliness is as important as the amount or of data coming in. And here again, Facebook, Twitter, now X, Instagram, TikTok. I don't even know if I have TikTok presented that way, if it's actually spelled with a hyphen in it or not. Local community sites, community pages, and blogs, community blogs, neighborhood blogs. Those are very helpful at times too, with people giving information. Police use of social media, keeping citizens informed of public safety emergencies. So these are all part of keeping people safe. And I'm sure you guys have that Mason app, that Mason Safe app, where you have I'm trying to find it. I think I have it here on my phone somewhere. where the crisis edu. This is George Mason's emergency preparedness in case of crisis. They send information out. What's going on, where, how to get out of it. Where is you know, the nearest exit. What's happening? What can we do to keep you safe? So they have those for communities as well. And the Mason community uses that app to direct people if there's a fire or there's an explosion or if there's a active shooter, God forbid, on campus, or a violent protest or a police chase that ends up in the parking lot of Eagle Bank Arena, which has happened before. Um, you know, these things are like Virginia Tech and UVA, have all been victims of, mass shooting incidents involving college students and the college community, the college campus community. And so that's social media. Those are apps that help you keep you safe, direct public relations and response, two-way communications with citizens real time, provide anonymous tips, conduct virtual ride-alongs. Those aren't as popular, but they are out there. Um, Also, helping, people walking people to their cars late at night, coming from the library, calling or sending a message or something like that, as a crime deterrence posture. Um, Locating or collecting evidence, locate or identify suspects, investigate uh, crimes, criminal offenses is what they should say, not criminal crimes, criminal offenses. So all of those things, um, help in determining, how the police can respond to the citizens based on this connectivity with social media. So it's huge in terms of the technology. They have these civic apps for mobile devices, which is that one I just talked to you about crisis app. Um, Mobile apps have been developed by police and citizens for various purposes, sending distress messages of lost or injured persons, sending crime prevention tips in neighborhoods, to residents, sending suspicious activity reports, from the police to the police, reporting 311 incidents to police. It's not 911, it's not 411. It's providing, information about situational awareness going on that people need to know about. So all of these things really help, police and communities engage in a positive way. These global positioning systems and CAD, computer aided drawing, or computer aided dispatching, or computer aided crash investigation, all use data. These global positioning for crash investigations, crash reconstruction investigations, vehicle location, damage evaluation, grade, curve, uh, radius, critical speed data, crash reconstruction. All of these, programs, these computerized programs, have data associated with that program that help provide the police and the community a more precise product in terms of things like crash investigation and crash reconstruction. Um, Looking at their use for not only in crash but also for arson and um, active shooters and bombing scenes and locating devices and things like that. So all of this evidence, automated evidence collection systems, are all part of these crime scene and collision investigation apparatus that police use every day across the country to help them provide greater um, data points. So the system, I think here says the system allows officers to get 40% more measurements in 50% less time. So, and those measurements are more accurate than they would be if they were taken by tape and recorded. So, you know, all of that provides, if you can reduce the, time out of service by 50% because you have GPS or GIS data that assists you in collecting that information, then more time you can spend on the road or in the community rather than doing this crash or collection work. Prevention of high-speed pursuits, so GIS tracking tags. So there are different types of vehicle tracking tags that you can actually deploy on vehicles you're chasing to reduce them. So if you get close enough, you can use a air compressed launcher to, from your grill that fires just basically a little tracking tag and a device into the suspect's vehicle, and then it stays with them until they find it or until it falls off. And if you don't have the availability of air support, either a rotary helicopter or fixed wing, you can track them by GIS device, and so you don't have to chase them. All you got to do is just be there and when they're there, or get ahead of them and begin to box them in without these high-speed police chases, bringing the public at risk. That's one of the greatest concerns with these types of police action is the risk to the public, not only from the speeding perpetrator of the crime, but also speeding police cars. And the more cars that are speeding, the more likely you're going to have an accident, and some innocent member of the public is going to be injured as a result of what you would think would be just, well-intended police action or effort. Electronic control devices. So this is kind of a unique name for a taser. This is the kind of the generic name. Taser is a trade name by the company Axion Taser that improved the device and patented it to the form that it's in now. But they're really they're in a group of devices called electronic control devices, or some people call them electronic muscular control devices. And it's a question over safety. And so some research indicate that the overall risk of severe injury is very small with these electronic devices. They're high voltage, but they're low amperage, and so they just incapacitate for a short period of time. But like anything else, when you use a device that incapacitates somebody, they always run the risk of kind of a secondary action causing their a medical emergency, whether they had a physical condition prior to being tased, or whether they, as a result of being hit with a taser, they lost their balance, became incapacitated, and hit their head on a bumper, or on a car, or on a curb, or on a street, or fell off. In one case, fell off a balcony and died from the fall. And those are, whenever you have to apply some sort of force or a device to control somebody, you always run the risk. But by and large, there's hundreds of thousands of taser deployments that occur on a monthly or yearly basis that end up with no long-term adverse effects to the individual. And so this reduces the risk of going hands-on with somebody. And I can guarantee you that, if you have to go hands-on with somebody, there's more of a likelihood that that person's going to be injured severely, or the officer's going to be injured severely, than the application of a taser. Um, and so, there's also, there's structured policies and parameters and procedures around the use of taser, and there's you have to get certified with the use of taser, and you have to maintain that certification, and you have to actually, go and test it and try it. And some agencies become a victim of the use of a taser, and take a taser hit just so you know what it feels like to that other person. And so when you're applying it, you know what to expect. Or if it gets taken away from the officer and used on you, taken away from you and gets used on you, you know what to expect. You know how long you may be incapacitated and for. So there are benefits to these devices. They certainly do reduce the hands-on use of force over time, and so it's a lot easier to recover from a taser than it is to recover from a ass strike or a dog bite or a gunshot wound. So, those are all potential lethal interactions where you don't necessarily have the same with the use of electronic control devices. Facial recognition technology, so the software is used all over for lots of different things, even on your iPhones. It's facial recognition, opening your iPhone to you and to you only, based on the same algorithms and points that are used in databases. And everybody relies on that facial recognition for their iPhone. And you can test it, unless you have dual faces on there. Your face is going to open, and there's going to be very few times, even with glasses or hats, where your facial recognition is not going to work properly. It's the same with facial recognition in the public, at points of entry in football stadiums, airports, subway terminals, government buildings, public buildings, schools, all of those things that help keep us safe from people that shouldn't be there, or people that are there to do harm to other people. Now, is it an invasion of one's privacy? Well, again, we'd argue, and the Supreme Court has said for years, that there's no expectation of privacy in public space. And so if you are walking down the street and entering a public sporting venue, and somebody took a picture of your face and matched that with a driver's license picture, which matched to a warrant that you had for your arrest, then so be it. Then it's there, it's in the public, and you have to be responsible for your actions. Now, the concern is that this data is tracking people, and it's kind of like the privacy advocates and the conspiracy theorists who come out of the woodwork about the government's tracking you, Big Brother's tracking you. Well, not necessarily tracking you, that they don't have time to track you, that they have there's thousands and thousands of calls for service a day in these agencies, and nobody's worried about tracking an innocent person or their movements. It's really about identifying people who could do harm to the community or individuals within the community and keeping them safe. Public transportation, national security issues, terrorism activity, people on the watch list, all those types of things. You do not want roaming your streets in the public without the benefit of technology and the use and leveraging that use of technology to help law enforcement, apprehend people who are dangerous. And that's what it's used for. But you'll never be able to convince everybody that it's, not an invasion of privacy, and government and Big Brother aren't tracking you, so they know when you went to the ABC store and, you know, bought alcohol. Who cares? And the police don't. I can guarantee you that, because they don't care. They're looking for real bad guys. And this is a technology that helps really assess in the ability to keep people safe and arrest bad guys. Fingerprinting, some of the automated fingerprinting identification systems like AFIS using biometric readers available to capture fingerprints, like live scan in the field. So if you stop somebody and there's an identity issue, there's a warrant out for their arrest, and they say, I'm not this person, it could be my brother, it could be my twin, blah, 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 blah. Well, if there's a fingerprint available and you have a live scan, you can solve it pretty quickly with taking a fingerprint and determining whether that is or is not the person who's the subject of that legal process or warrant or identity issue, without having to put them in handcuffs for detention, investigative detention, and take them to a place, a jail, a lockup, a station, to be able to compare, photographs, facial information, or inked fingerprints. Oftentimes you have a combination of many of these things. You have both live scanning, you have fingerprints or photographs from mugshots, DMV files, facial recognition, that can help you assess whether or not this person is or is not the individual of interest, in to the police or to the government. Police use of robots. Robots are equipped with various tools. Some we see this in a lot of EOD environments. So what happens is, we see these devices. They're equipped with odor sensors, chemical sensors, video capabilities, night vision cameras, electronic detectors, two-way communication devices, and what we see is they have also the ability to use explosive devices to so you have a suspicious package, and so you can blow up that package with a robot. So your robot goes up there, plants a plastic explosive device just to get a flash on that bag or that package to determine that there's not a bigger bomb in there, so if you don't have the ability to remove it. So there's all kinds of uses for robots, but most of them are in the ordnance disposal arena or what we call SWAT arena, whereby there is enough information and to use these robots during hostage barricade or SWAT operations. And I'm sure you've seen some of the videos where you send a robot into the house to look for the guy who's barricaded, rather than sending a person or a dog in to find them. And it's all you got to do is buy a new robot, but nobody dies at the end. Also, bomb removal, search and rescue, includes submersible drones and robots. Not only to look for things in the water, vehicles that have gone into ponds or lakes or rivers, or a lot of these underwater unmanned vehicles help locate ships and water vessels and things like that are submerged. So there's a ton of use for different types of robots, and including drones, which we'll talk about next. But there's a huge wave, what they call unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, and the use of drones in policing, and not only policing, but also for other public safety. Fire departments use drones to help large warehouse fires, to look for hot spots. They can fly over the um, the the affected structure, and they can see using infrared where hot spots are being created, which means that are points of attack for the fire department, rather than trying to risk putting personnel on the roof to look for hot spots and things like that. And oftentimes you don't have the availability, for multiple ladder trucks and all that. So you can fly over with a drone and send back real live video with thermal imaging and infrared imaging of these structures, so that it's a lost cause or where to attack the fire next, etc. The same thing with looking for lost people in the woods, children, with developmental disorders, often find themselves lost or run away. Elderly people with dementia walk away from their homes or facilities. And it's much easier and much quicker, and you cover much more ground with the use of a drone than you do with officers, or even with canines, bloodhounds, etc. Because you have to cast out. If you don't know exactly where they went into the woods, you have to cast out, and that takes time. It means you have to cast your dog out in different directions and hope they pick up a scent, and that the scent is the scent that you're looking for, versus using a drone with, again, thermal imaging or infrared to look through, the canopies, the trees, to help find somebody that may be there. It's more difficult when there's a full canopy, and certainly easier when there's trees, the leaves are off the trees. But there's also different techniques and different pieces of equipment that drones can use to pinpoint these, and they can cover a much larger area. And if you have 2 or 3 drones covering, contiguous areas, you can cover those areas in much quicker than perhaps you would be able to do on foot. It doesn't always replace, individuals on the ground doing searches, because sometimes they can't see into certain places, sheds and, buildings, lean-tos, caves, culverts, all that kind of stuff. But it does help, begin to eliminate larger areas of concern. All, again, the use of technology on the backs of devices that are employed. So, the future, we talked about at the very beginning, what is the future? Well, I think drones are the future in policing, and especially in fire and public safety, to help make decisions about circumstances and equipment and resources needed to assist in whatever the issue may be. So there's been a lot of questions over the police use of drones, surveillance purposes involving serious offenses, search and seizure operations, the use of a drone to collect information. And the courts have already ruled on that the curtilage of your house kind of goes straight up to the sky. You have no limit going up. And if you can't see it with a naked eye from the street, in a place that you could be, then, flying over it with a drone is not permitted, nor can you use thermal imaging or infrared to assist you by way of drone in a criminal offense. It's different if you're like looking for a person who's, running in the woods, versus you getting a search warrant for a house based on a heat signature out of a marijuana or a grow operation in the attic. There's a big difference. There's also a question with the use of drones for minor offenses such as catching speeders. That has not been challenged yet, because I don't think that the police are interested in using drones to catch motor vehicle offenders. That's never been on the radar, so to speak, for the use of a drone. It's much more of a public safety issue, finding lost people, apprehending dangerous persons in the woods, who fled the scene, rather than using it for speeders or traffic issues. Um, Arming drones with tear gas. Certainly, the only people that drones are not allowed to be armed. At least non-military drones in the United States cannot be armed. So there's arming them with tear gas or pepper spray or any of those other devices is only kind of a futuristic perspective, and it's not really a reality today, and I'm not sure it's a reality in the near future. And using drones as a deadly option, a deadly force option rather, is not something that's on the table right now. Although, if you have somebody who's shooting at the police in a in a barricade situation, um, maybe a drone would be an applicable resolution depending on the circumstances, right? But I don't think that anybody's willing to open, that Pandora's box at this time. You still need the ability to make a determination based on the threat that individual poses, and perhaps maybe a drone would be a reasonable resolution under some circumstances. I know, and I don't know what that is. I don't think they've really used a drone for that, other than overseas in a combat theater. That's a different story. Different rules of engagement, different outcomes. So, just things to consider, maybe where things may be going with the use of technology. So, I appreciate you guys hanging in there. Thanks again for a great semester. I think this is the last chapter that we're going to be doing, chapter 14, technology. And, there's not a lot that you're not going to be seeing in your future with. It wouldn't surprise me at all, based on the level of and the speed of technology and technical advancement in public safety, that you're going to be confronting more issues in your lifetime than I've laid out here for you, certainly, involving technology, the use of technology in policing. So, that being said, I appreciate it. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.